Hello, and welcome to Let's Get Lit. In today's video, we're going to go over The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. So, I hope you have a good, cozy blanket, a nice hot cup of cocoa or coffee, and let's get into this really classic story of the Headless Horseman. Oh, wait, hold on. Alright, ooh, this feels better. Let's get into this classic Washington Irving tale. This story starts with Washington Irving telling us a little bit about the region known as Tarrytown. This region was settled by Dutch settlers when the first inhabitants came into the shore. He says that not too far away, about 2 miles, is a little valley hidden away amongst the hills, and it's called Sleepy Hollow. He remembers how he visited there one Sunday afternoon and how eerily quiet the entire woods were as he was shooting for squirrel. He also tells the reader about how this tiny little town has a great air of superstition. He says that everyone who lives in this town and adjacent to it all tell tales of the same apparition they see throughout the hollow. The apparition is known as the Headless Horseman. Many folks believe that he is a Hessian soldier and that his head was carried away by a cannonball, and then every night rides from the graves of the churches and goes out in search for a replacing head. But he has to be back in the church before daybreak. Next, the author tells the reader of Ichabod Crane, a schoolmaster sent from Connecticut to the little town of Sleepy Hollow. There, he was to help teach the children. He described Ichabod as a type of walking scarecrow, with large feet, large ears, long arms, and huge green eyes. He then goes on to say that Ichabod Crane resided with farmers of the children. It was customary in that time for school teachers to stay with the farmers of the children who he taught. To seem like less of a burden, Ichabod helped with the smaller chores around the farm for the men. With the women, he would talk with them about the daily gossip, stories he's read in books, or about witchcraft which he had read in his Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft. It was said that he was favorably looked upon by most of the community. Ichabod Crane was a very superstitious man. It is said that any small disturbance in the forest or things that frightened Ichabod, he would always blame on witchcraft, and the best way he thought to combat this witchcraft was to sing psalms. So, it is said that people throughout the town could hear him singing at all hours of the day. The author does tell the reader that one of Ichabod's favorite pastimes during the winter was to sit with the local wives as they were cooking and roasting apples on the hearth and swap ghost stories. He also taught singing lessons for a lot of the local people in town. That was one way he made some extra money. And he could be seen every Sunday in the front of the church singing with his pupils. The author notes how Ichabod may not have been the best singer, but he was definitely the most distinct. The author then states that as much as Ichabod was a learned man and believer in spirits, there was one presence that was more powerful than any other, and that was women. One woman in particular, Katrina Van Tassel, was the woman who caught his eye. The author goes on to describe how beautiful Katrina was, and that she came from a very rich farmer, with lots of land and plenty of spoils. Ichabod goes on to dream about wooing her, dating her, and eventually marrying her. How he would inherit all the fortune from her father, make investments in local plots of wild land, and have a family with her and move them to Tennessee or Kentucky. It just so happens that Katrina is one of his singing students, and one day as he's heading towards the farm for a lesson, Ichabod is looking at the farm and everything on it, and he can't help but imagine all of the animals as food prepared and ready for him to devour. This is because we learn that Ichabod has a huge appetite and can eat a lot of food, though he is very skinny. It's quite comical just how in detail he goes about the preparation of the food. The author also tells the reader that Ichabod is not alone in the conquest of trying to win Katrina's heart. There is another suitor who is great competition for Ichabod. His name is Abraham, or abbreviated Brom von Brunt. He is described as a broad-shouldered, double-jointed man with short curly black hair, a bluff but not unpleasant countenance, and an air of fun and arrogance. Throughout the entire town, he had quite the reputation. He's known for fun and playful, but also mischievous conduct. Wherever there's a brawl or a bout of fun, you can always bet that Brom Bones would be there. He also is known to play pranks and to be a bit of a jokester. Brom knew that Ichabod was trying to court Katrina as well, so Brom extended the old invitation of one good fight for Katrina's hand. Ichabod, however, knew that with Brom's stature and his huge frame, he would easily defeat Ichabod. So, he doesn't take him up on the offer. The author also tells the reader about Brom beginning to play funny pranks on Ichabod. He would go to the schoolhouse and flip over the desks, he would tease Ichabod in front of Katrina, and he even taught his dog to howl every time Ichabod would sing. Then one day, as Ichabod is teaching class, a small servant from the Van Tassel household came to the school doors and handed Ichabod an invitation for a party that night that was being held at the farm. Everyone in the schoolhouse was excited by what had just happened. All of the children hurried through their lessons, and Ichabod released them an hour before usual time. Once school is done, Ichabod went to his bathroom and began to prepare for the party that night. Once he was dressed and ready, he went to the farmer that was housing him and asked to borrow a horse from the farmer. The horse that he had was an old horse, full of mean spirit, and only had one good eye to his name. And that name was Gunpowder. Next, we see Ichabod riding through the autumn countryside, heading to Katrina Van Tassel's house. He sees all of the birds and beasts of the field and describes them to his reader. Ichabod makes it to the house just as the sun is going down. The author also states that Brom was there in his full best, along with his horse, who was just as wily as Brom. The horse's name was Daredevil. Ichabod describes all the people who attended the party, mostly farmers and their wives and children, all dressed to the best of their abilities. Ichabod goes inside the mansion, and before him, a huge table of really good food is prepared. There are cakes and pies and rolls and carved meats and drinks available to everyone. After everyone is finished eating, the music begins to play. This invited everyone to dance and be joyful. Ichabod thought of himself as a really great dancer, and he danced with Katrina throughout the night. Once the dancing was over, everyone began to gather around and swap ghost stories. The story started off with tales of how each of them had a hand in helping win the war. But then the conversations turned to ghosts and other spectral sightings of the town, from the woman in white to Major Andre's tree, the most famous one being the Headless Horseman. After the stories were over, everyone begins to pack up and head home. Ichabod stays back once everyone is left to talk to Katrina. The author states that he doesn't know what they talked about, but it mustn't have been that good, since Ichabod hurries from the house and goes and gets Gunpowder and begins to leave. On his way home, Ichabod notes how dark it is, and that it's also the witching hour. As he's heading home, he sees up ahead in the distance the tree that is known as Mayor Andre's tree. He thinks he sees something inside the tree, but when he gets closer, he sees that the tree was struck by lightning, and that the white just happened to be the part of the tree that was dead. As he was continuing on his way, he makes it to the bridge where Andre was murdered. As he's crossing the bridge, he sees up ahead of him a figure in the road. As he gets closer to the figure, he sees that it's the Headless Horseman. He notes that in the horseman's lap is a makeshift head made from a pumpkin. This terrifies Ichabod, and he begins to whip the horse to get him to go faster. But unfortunately, it's not until that he gets really close to the horseman that Gunpowder realizes the danger they're in, and then begins to travel at breakneck speed. Ichabod can see up ahead of him the area that he needs to cross. However, Gunpowder, being a foolish animal that he is, turns to the left and begins to continue down into the woods. Ichabod knows where Gunpowder is headed to, and the river and the church that's coming up. Ichabod remembers the stories told previously, that as long as he makes it across the bridge, he'll be fine. As Gunpowder is hurrying his best, he can see the saddle begin to slip from underneath him. So Ichabod holds on tight, and the saddle falls by the wayside. Getting ever so close to the bridge and the church, Ichabod looks up and can see the stars, which reinforces the idea that he is almost there. As he's crossing the bridge, he looks behind him to see if the spirit is right there. As he turns back, he can see the figure on top of the horse, and the figure throws the pumpkin towards Ichabod. The pumpkin hits Ichabod in the head, and Ichabod rolls down the banks off the bridge. Gunpowder continues home and does not stop to look back. The next morning, the farmers that Ichabod was staying with sees Gunpowder, but no trace of Ichabod. So him and a group of men go searching throughout the town to see what they can find. They make it to the bank where Ichabod was hit with the pumpkin, and they found Ichabod's hat, but no trace of Ichabod. After the moment, the farmer decides to look through Ichabod's things and sees the book of witchcraft and vows that his children will not be going back to school. The author then finishes out the story with what happens to everybody else. Brom ends up marrying Katrina, a new schoolmaster comes into town and teaches the children, and the wives of the town insist that Ichabod was taken away by the Headless Horseman. Some people believe that Ichabod is still alive, leaving the town, going back to school, and becoming a politician. But the people who live in that small town would not believe such nonsense. The author mentions that the only person who might know exactly what happened to Ichabod would be Brom Bones, due to the fact that every time the story of Ichabod comes up, he begins to smile and quickly dismisses the story. We'll never truly know what happens to Ichabod. This is where the story ends, and the reader is left with this huge question. Thank you so much for tuning in to Let's Get Lit. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed our conversation about The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and check out my next video as I review the classic animated Disney version along with the Tim Burton adaptation. Have a great rest of your day, and as always, stay lit.